right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Liferay Digital Solutions Forum. It's great to be back here. I enjoy having the chance every year to see what the team here in the UK has been able to achieve along with all of you. As I was watching the opening remarks by Eddie and Mike, I noticed a couple of things. One was how much things change, and the other was how many things stay the same. I don't know if you noticed, but one of the offers in the mobile app is for some gin. And one of the things that my commerce team tells me is that you can't really get people to use the digital channel that much to do commerce orders unless you give them some kind of discount or giveaway. And then they go right back on to doing whatever they were doing before, which is like to pick up the phone or send a fax, because they actually have a much better customer experience. And the part that's, I think, changed is that 2 years ago, everyone wanted to have a mobile app. Everyone had to have one. Now it's like, I gotta go back to the App Store, download some other thing that I gotta manage. I don't wanna deal with it, right? So do download it for the gin. But I'll understand if you don't actually use it all that much. And I think that kind of encapsulates a lot of the challenges that we're facing in our organizations as we grapple with digital innovation. We've been talking about this here at Liferay for several years. As Eddie mentioned, it's a topic that's been discussed for the last 20 years, and yet so much seems to not be changing. At the same time, you look around, you see competitors, maybe you see startups, and they seem to be moving faster. And one of the things that I've been thinking about as a leader of a technology vendor working with you is, what is our role? How can we help to facilitate innovation, which ultimately has to be driven by business and IT leaders like the ones assembled in this room? Well, one of my team members found a great article in the BBC written by Tim Harford. He's a writer with the Financial Times. He has a podcast, I believe, called 50 Things That Made the Modern Economy. And there are some really important and interesting lessons to draw. You probably know that the electric light bulb was invented in the late 19th century. We Americans take the credit for that, although as I found in my research, there were actually a number of predecessors who had done some prototypes with the electric light bulb even before Mr. Edison, including two gentlemen here in Britain, Warren de la Rue, as well as a gentleman named Joseph Swan, who by 1860 had a working prototype, but lacked a number of things, among others a good vacuum technology. And so Mr. Edison got the credit, and by 1879, he had built this first prototype, which later went on to be patented and then would put into widespread commercial use. So you would think then that at the turn of the century, we would be seeing the world running on electric power. Edison himself had power plants available, I believe, in New York and London, just over here in Holborn, as early as 1920. But the reality was that it wasn't electricity driving the world at this point. It was still steam power. Steam power ruled the world, whether it was steam-powered trains or steam-powered factories. The sights and sounds of train whistles and the chug-a-chug of a locomotive probably evokes some kind of romantic feelings in us modern people, but the reality is that the technology was quite mature at the time, and in some ways primitive compared to what would be coming in the next 50 years. This is a photo of the Queen Street Mill based in Burnley. It's a cotton mill that is one of the last surviving examples. They can actually still run it, but the commercial use of it stopped in 1982 when it was finally shut down. And you can kind of think about maybe the slow death of things like COBOL and Fortran, which may still be ultimately running some of your back-end systems. Well, if you are that last COBOL developer left in your organization, you probably still have a good number of years left if you think about things like this mill. Steam-powered factories like this survived well into the 1930s and beyond, decades after the availability of electric power. Here I have some footage that I found on YouTube of the Burnley Queen Street Mill. You can see that this is the main steam-powered engine. It's still coal-fired, so you can actually see him firing up that furnace to produce the steam energy. That then drives this single main shaft, which in turn really drives everything else in this factory. You can see everything is turning at once, and all of these are ultimately connected back to that main shaft. And so factories like this in the 20s and 30s were everywhere. In the US certainly, but also here in Britain. The work itself was repetitive, it was low-skilled, and the noise, the soot, the lack of light meant most of the workers were poorer and they didn't have many options, right? In fact, it might be a stretch to attribute this solely to the technology used, but even child labor was well in use back in this time, again, because of the working conditions and everything else that was tied to the economic results of the technology. One of the things that the writer talks about is that it was actually quite dangerous to work in these mills because everything's running at once, and so if you had a stray shoelace that was untied, it could get caught up in the machinery and cause permanent disability. So, electric power starts to become widely available. Some factory owners start to experiment. They say, well, you know, coal is expensive, it causes a lot of pollution, and maybe I want to make this long-term investment in electric power. Let's take that old steam-powered engine right out and plop in an electric motor. And so some people did that. And the common experience really was a bit of disappointment, really. They said, well, I spent a lot of money to do this, but I'm not really seeing any real huge net benefits. Maybe over time, maybe over many decades, I'll be able to recoup some of the cost, but that capital investment isn't really paying off very quickly, right? So most people stuck to steam power. And if you think about it, you know, it makes sense because the whole point of electric power wasn't just to replace the old power source with a new one, but it was really about enabling a completely new paradigm and a new way of working. I belabored a bit the point about how everything in that factory was organized around that central drive shaft. And the truth is that everything about that factory was really tied to that technology. And it wasn't until people started not just swapping out the motor, but reimagining what that factory could look like in light of new electric technology that things really started to change. So one of the things that you could do was when you were no longer beholden to organizing everything around that shaft, you can begin to think, well, you know, the way that we produce our products, we've got maybe the weavers over here, and then we take the cotton that comes out of it and we dye it, and then maybe there's some finishing that happens, packaging, and delivery. And so people start to reorganize the work around the production line. The other thing that would happen was the old factories had to be built really sturdy, and everything was cramped really close together, again, because of the steam-powered engine. Now with electric power, you could actually spread workers out. You could give them more space, and you could actually build the factories to be lighter and to have more natural light and natural air. So there were incredible benefits to be had when you took advantage of this new technology, but it took years for it to work out in people's minds what that would look like for their respective industries. So really, most people stuck with what they knew for a really long time. The main point, I think, is that digital is easy, but transformation is hard. A lot of us have probably faced some frustrations. Whether you're a technologist or a business leader, you've probably thought, man, why is it taking my organization so long to change the way we work? And one of the things that I want to encourage you with this morning is that it's supposed to take a long time. We've been working the way we've worked for the last 30, 40, 50 years or more, and it's not apparent or obvious at first how things need to change. A lot of people like to talk about Uber and Airbnb, and they say, well, here are these upstarts, and they're going to eat your lunch, and you got to be, careful and all that stuff. But the reality is, the problems that you face, the challenges, and the business models that you have are tremendously complex. There's no way that an Uber is going to come in and suddenly have a credible option for B2B paper manufacturing, for example. There's no way that some kind of Silicon Valley startup is going to understand the challenges that government and local government uniquely face as well. I saw this news article about Waitrose, I believe about 2 weeks ago, announced that they're going to start launching a 2-hour grocery delivery service in London. And I chuckled because this was the sort of thing we were talking about doing at the very beginning of the internet. And Eddie mentioned that we've been talking about digital transformation for 20 years, and we still haven't figured it out, right? How do you make this profitable? How do you improve that customer experience, but still operate efficiently and be able to improve the bottom line? So at Liferay, we want to do 2 things for you, IT and business leaders that are trying to sort out how do we drive digital innovation in our organizations. And we have several new products that we've announced this year. And the theme of these products really is about facilitating this digital innovation. So the first thing we want to do is we want to give you more business value to start with. I've been speaking this morning about how challenging it can be to figure out how technology brings to bear more business value, greater business value than you've been able to achieve in the past. So one of the themes that you'll see running through the products that we'll be talking about today is that we're thinking a lot more about business value. Many of you are familiar with our core portal platform, which has evolved into the digital experience platform. You know that we have always been concerned about how to take some of the most commonly used functionalities in modern IT requirements and make them fit for business. So with 7.1, one of the things you'll see is that we've done more to improve both the web and form-based customer-facing experience so that you can build more compelling digital touchpoints for your customers. We've also launched this year a new product called Analytics Cloud. And for someone who has been involved in marketing, I can tell you just how hard it can be to figure out, well, I've got my new partner portal, I've got my new customer portal, it's behind a firewall, I can throw Google Analytics on there, but then how do I figure out what the important outcomes are? What are the goals that I'm trying to support? Being able to wrangle Google Analytics to figure out how to make it fit your use case is not for the faint of heart. And so with Analytics Cloud, we really wanted to dive deep into that challenge for you and then figure some of that business value out for you so that you can actually get on with delivering value to your customers. We're also very happy to announce Liferay Commerce. This is a new part of our portfolio that really extends the value proposition of Liferay from just the web-based digital experiences to transactions to being able to purchase online, but also to fulfill orders and then provide customer service post-sale. And we wanted to take a particular focus with this on the B2B experience because we understand that it's not enough just to take a B2C commerce offering and then to put some B2B dressing on it. We really looked at our core customer base, which tended to be some of these more complex industries, and to rethink and reimagine what commerce should look like from a B2B perspective. Secondly, so this is all fine and nice. A lot of you are probably wondering, well, sure, that's great, you have these new products. We're still really wrestling with how to manage the thing that we already have. And especially if you're an IT leader, you're probably thinking, I spend far too much time managing my servers, figuring out DevOps, doing backups, setting up environments, and I've got my marketing leader or my customer service leader, and they want me to build a new feature. They want me to let my customers download their invoices through the portal, but I don't have time to work on that because I'm always kind of dealing with the nuts and bolts of things. And so this is kind of a preview for the UK market, because this is being formally announced next week at our event in New Orleans. But we're helping you get technology out of the way of transformation with our new offering called Liferay DXP Cloud. So as I mentioned, a lot of times we want to deliver business value for our stakeholders, whether it's a new website, customer portal, a new online delivery service. And we want to get to that business value as quickly as possible, but a lot of times the management of the infrastructure gets in the way. It is incredibly complex to deal with the databases, the servers, the operating systems, setting up the network, being able to deal with peak demand, being able to set up elastic demand. All of these things really are a challenge for today's IT leaders in a time when they really don't have the time or the budget to deal with this stuff. The second challenge is the nature of some of Liferay's DXP technology. How do you actually install it? How do you cluster it? How do you monitor it to make sure that everything is running smoothly? These things can also really get in the way of freeing up your time to do what you need to do. In fact, there is just an overall practice of DevOps that really understands that it's not enough just to build the solution, but you ultimately have to manage it and run it in production. So with DXP Cloud, we want to give you business value on day one. As soon as you get your DXP Cloud instances running, you can actually start developing, you can start deploying, and you can start managing your solutions on our offering. This allows you to focus on what matters for your business, to draw on some of the best practices of other Liferay installations around the world, and ultimately to evolve faster, because we don't know what that digital future looks like, but we know that you need to try different things as quickly as possible to get there. So let me just show you a few things here, and for the business leaders in the room, please bear with us as we go a little bit on the technical side, but let me assure you that the net of all this is that your IT folks are going to be able to be much more responsive and much more agile as they meet your requirements. So one thing you'll notice here is that you have a number of services available to you in the DXP Cloud offering. Everything from activity monitoring, error logs, backups, and other services. You can see that everything you need to run your IT solution, from the database to the Liferay servers to the search infrastructure, is managed through DXP Cloud. It's really easy to set up both the monitoring, which is just happening out of the box, as well as to scale your infrastructure. And so here you see that we're kind of running low on memory here on this Liferay instance. So you're able to go directly into the tool to look at how that memory usage has changed over time. So in the last 5 minutes, we can see that some of that usage is peaking. And so you're going to go ahead and be able to go into the scaling menu option and actually enable auto scaling, so that as demand comes in, you're going to be able to automatically scale your infrastructure. One of the challenges that IT faces is that every time you get a new developer on board or a new administrator, I've heard sometimes that some of our customers take up to 3 weeks to get them using the same environment, the same tools, to get them, even to start writing one line of code. And so one of the challenges that we want to solve with Liferay DXP Cloud is to make it really easy to replicate that environment for a new developer or a new administrator so that they can start writing code right away. Of course, you have to have reliable backups, and so that's as easy as clicking a button in order to have a record that you can later go back to and audit of your installation. And then finally, one of the things that many of our customers have talked to about in terms of their challenges managing Liferay DXP is setting up and managing different deployment environments. And so in the new Liferay DXP Cloud offering, you will be able to very easily set up your development, user acceptance, and production environments, and then easily deploy and copy code and data from one environment to another with the click of a button. So there's going to be a lot there, and we're going to be formally rolling this out to the wider public at the beginning of next year. But for planning purposes, it may be interesting for you as well to take a look at Liferay DXP Cloud. Okay, so the point of all of this, obviously, is for you to figure out how to apply this technology to your respective industry. It's probably a little bit obvious to draw parallels to the cotton weaving industry in Yorkshire and Lancashire, and to think, well, if you don't make changes, you're going to go out of business, or you're going to become a museum, which actually this factory is now. And of course, that's always there. We're always at the risk in running our businesses of facing competitive threats and ultimately facing possible extinction. But more than that, I think it's exciting to think about the possibilities. One of the most important outcomes of the use of electric power in the manufacturing industry was that conditions became much, much better for the workers. I mentioned some of them earlier, but one of the most surprising things for me was that when the focus was less on the quantity of materials you produced, it then became about quality, and it became about craftsmanship. And this meant that each of the workers were more engaged with their work. It meant that they had to be more creative, and it actually gave them a lot more autonomy, so that factories had to start competing for talent. This led to a rise in wages and overall better conditions for everyone. And so obviously, in the future that we face, it's not that simple. And I think the technology available, whether it's machine learning, whether it's the cloud, whether it's figuring out what to do with all of the data you have or don't have about your customers, it's incredibly complex, but at the same time, it's staggeringly powerful. And so how do you navigate all this? And I think what we've realized here at Liferay is that we can't skip over IT and just say, oh, let's just figure out what the business needs and deliver to them. We need IT and business working together to figure it out together. One of the best examples that I've heard recently about this is a company called Heal. It's a new startup based in Los Angeles, and one of the outcomes, or one of the ways that this gentleman who really is a technologist, he had an electrical engineering degree from UCLA, Nick Desai, he was actually in the emergency room with his infant son and his wife, and he was waiting around, I believe, 8 hours before one of the doctors was able to see him. And of course, we're talking about the U.S. healthcare system, which is broken and challenged in a number of different ways. But I think that that same challenge probably exists in other parts of the world. But Nick Desai had that experience, and because of that experience, he was really compelled to create this new company called Heal. And the idea of Heal is that by automating a lot of the back office work that goes into doing your insurance claims, figuring out entitlements and benefits and getting paid back, doctors could actually focus on patients. And what they're doing is they're making it so that for the same cost of a visit to the emergency room or the hospital, these doctors will actually show up at your house in a 2-hour window and do a home visitation. And all of this is possible because of technology, of course, but more importantly, that aha moment of Nick Desai having this idea came because as a technical person, as an IT person, he actually peered into the world that he was about to transform. He came to a point where he understood how nerve-wracking, how challenging it is for a patient to have to sit in that emergency room for 8 hours and not know if something was deathly wrong with his child. And I think the challenge to us in IT as well is to get your heads out of the server room and into the world around you. Because when you start seeing the challenges that your business leaders are facing, there's a good chance that you have a great new idea for how your technology and your technical expertise will help solve that problem. So with that, I'll look forward to seeing all that you're able to achieve. Again, thank you for being here, and look forward to speaking with you all. Thanks.